Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It is Cricketing Hall of Fame time. We've not been talking Cricketing Hall of Fame for a little while. We are into the final four players in the world in Baldy's labour of love. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but we're going to talk to spinners on tonight's episode. So stay tuned for Cricketing Hall of Fame. We're into the final four. The labour of love is coming to an end. We're into the final four players on the Cricketing Hall of Fame. A quick reminder to listeners, what we've been doing throughout the course of the last couple of years or so is taking five.
It wasn't supposed to take that long.
It has dragged on for a little while, to be fair, yes.
We're supposed to be taking five players at a time, and we were sticking 6 minutes on the clock. As we've got down into the final 10 greatest cricketers, primarily focusing on the Test cricket.
It's all Test cricket, yeah.
Although we have sort of thrown the odd one-day stat in there. We are now down to a scenario where we're talking about a couple of players on each podcast. We are going to talk about arguably the two greatest spinners in the world on tonight's podcast. We're not going to do, I guess, because we're going to make a lot of comparisons throughout the course of this pod. We're not going to put individual time on the clock for each of these guys, but we are going to time box this at about 20 minutes so that we don't go on and on about yours and Lippy's.
We still could be this time next week.
Biggest labour of love. But look, it's no surprise who we're going to be talking about. But do you want to just give us a little bit of a rundown of the two people that we're going to stick on the clock, and we'll go from there?
Can do, chaps. So tonight's podcast in the Men's Test Cricket Hall of Fame will feature Shane Warne from Australia and Muttiah Muralidaran from Sri Lanka. So I'll just go through their individual records, their Test records and first class records.
We're going to be able to keep that under 20 minutes.
Yeah, we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. Okay, Shane Warne, 145 tests, 125 catches, most of them standing at first slip. Scored 3,154 runs at an average of 17.32 and an infamous high score of 99 against New Zealand. Most test runs without scoring an international 100. He did have 12 50s. And in 273 bowling innings, took 708 wickets at a bowling average of 25.41 and a strike rate of 57.4. Best bowling in an innings, 8 for 71. Best bowling in a match, 12 for 128. That was one of 10 wicket hauls that Shane Warne had in his career, to go with 37 5-wicket hauls. Those are second and fourth, respectively, in all time. And he had averaged about 4.88 wickets per match, which is pretty good, and had an average above replacement player of plus 5.79. So that's kind of top 25 all time. And in the first class arena, 1,000 wickets, 1,319 wickets at 26, average at 26, strike rate of 56.7. Any quick comments before we have a look at Murali's record?
We're nearly out of time.
Okay. I'll proceed quickly. Okay, Muttiah Murali doing 133 test matches, so slightly fewer test matches than Warney. 1,261 runs at an average of 11.6 with a higher score of 67, just the one test 50 for Murali. But 800 wickets at an average of, I want to say 22.72.
Correct.
Which is pretty good, and a strike rate of 55. Best bowling in an innings, 9 for 51. On his way to a best match figures of 16 for 122. That's one of 22 10-wicket hauls in international cricket, and 67 5-wicket hauls. Both of those, not surprisingly, first all-time. And his average above replacement player is plus 8.76, which is good enough for seventh all-time. Pretty much every stat you look at except for his average and strike rate are top 10. His strike rate's 40th at average of a strike rate of 55.
The obvious elephant in the room here. I mean, we're privileged in that we get your list a little bit ahead of time sometimes, and you've framed this in the Warne v Murali conversation that it's 3v4 and that Shane Warne fills the number 3 spot. You've just rattled off all those stats. Murali blows him out of the water. I mean, think a couple of the things that really strike me. He's got a better average, better strike rate, more wickets, more 5-fers, more 10-fers. Honestly, what is there to debate? So 67 5-fers, as far as I can tell, I probably have missed a few, but let's compare that to New Zealand as a country. New Zealand spinners of all time have taken somewhere between 46 and 55 5-fers. So Murali has every spinner that's ever played for New Zealand covered. Vittori has 20 of those.
In fairness, that you don't play a spinner at home.
No, I noted.
But still, all of them though.
Let's go on 10.
All of the guys who were 12th man.
Let's go on 10 fizz in a match though, 22 times. New Zealand in history, all of our bowlers has 27. So like this, I mean, obviously we're at number 3 and 4. We're at all-time players. But Murali, he's wipes the floor with Warne stats wise, and you're a big stats guy. This has been very much framed around stats. How is he not above him? Like, this is going to be a conversation that covers the 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But
And your primary stat there, which is the average replacement value, he's also
better. Yes, and look, you're absolutely right. So if you just scratch the very surface and you just look at the big gaudy numbers, the 800 and the 22 and et cetera, then they paint a picture of Murali being the greatest bowler of all time. However, I think it's worth having a look at, if you're going to compare two players, then let's compare them in as much equality as we possibly can. I think that's worth it at this point, right? Absolutely. Because we're down to 2 batters and 2 bowlers, and I think it's worth having a look at that. So let's have a look at... I used a couple of techniques here. Let's have a look at them head-to-head. So in games where Australia played against Sri Lanka, they both played 13 tests effectively in their careers against each other or against that opposition team. I don't think there was a couple where Murali didn't play against Warne and Cairns from memory. So they both played 13 test matches. Both of them had 59 wickets, but Murali's cost him 36.07 at a strike rate of 69. Warne 25.54 at a strike rate of 53. I think those stats are still relevant, mainly because Sri Lanka had some bloody good batters in their side. So they had Sangakkara, they had Jayawardene, they had Muralidaran, they had Jayasuriya, they had Angelo Matthews, they had Marvin Atapatu, which is probably my favourite sporting name.
Yeah, I think it does go underrated that they actually had a really good
batting side, right?
But then so did Australia.
Yeah, Australia had a bit good batting
Matthew Hayden, Justin Langer, Steve Wall, Ricky Ponting, Mike Hussey.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if we take that, Warne wins that slight head-to-head. If we have a look at all of the other international sides that were, I'm going to say, quote unquote, good at that time. So I'm counting England, India, and South Africa as the premier places to go and play. Murali had 368 wickets at 26. Warne had 321 wickets at 24, and Warne had a better strike rate against those excellent top-class nations. Now let's go and have a look at the Bangladesh and Zimbabwe records, because those are the other end of the spectrum. Warne played 3 games in his career combined against Zimbabwe and Bangladesh. Murali played 25. So I think it's worth having a look. If you take those 2 sets of records out from a stat padding perspective, Murali's total record is 624 wickets at 24.8 and a strike rate of 58. Warne's record is 691 wickets at a strike rate of 25.4 and at an average of 25.4 and a strike rate of 57.6. So all other things being equal, once you take out some of the, I won't going to say lesser nations, but the developing nations at that time, Zimbabwe and Bangladesh were struggling. You take those stats out, they are almost like head-to-head. There's not much in it, right? You could throw a tissue over those records. That's with respect to their bowling. I think it's also worth having a look at, and this is where I want to open it up to everyone. What else did they bring to the party in terms of their greatness? Because, like, when I think about Murali, and I'd like to start with Murali, he overcame so much adversity in his career just to stay on the field. He was no ball twice in Test match cricket. Like, the ICC had to legislate for and against Murali being able to continue to bowl. Just the mental impact of that has it's killed the career of some cricketers. Like, there are not hundreds, but there are a lot of cricketers who went through that same process that he had to go through. And I mean, he bowled with a cast on his arm to show that he wasn't.
It's an amazing piece of footage. Have you guys seen that? The Mark Nicholas,
unbelievable. So you have to give him credit for the sheer amount of adversity and opposition that he had to overcome to continue playing Test cricket. Now, it also must be said that ICC did change its rules halfway through his career to change I can't remember, the angle was from 5 degrees to 15 degrees or whatever. some would say to accommodate Murali, to legalise it, legitimise his action.
And some seamers as well. Brett Lee, I think, fell into that category on that.
A number of them, right? So the rules changed over the course of his career. Sure, absolutely. Was he instructed not to bowl the doosra at one point by the ICC? Yes, he was. However, for me, the outstanding mental resilience that he showed to go through that with a smile and not to go into a shell and become like this reclusive guy that was kind of jaded by the process of being in Test cricket is amazing. It's incredible.
And that now we're open up to us.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but Baldy, I think, Lippy, your question is right, and I've written down those exact words. It says on my paper here, every stat says Murali is better. So what is it about Warne that's so majestic? If I kind of look at it, I've got a couple of those stats written down that you talked about, Baldy. So the 89 wickets against Bangladesh for Murali, 87 against Zimbabwe. Often talked about that Warne's record against against India, was pretty poor. 43 wickets at 47 against India. If we look at their Murali, he had two sort of teams he struggled against a little bit compared to his career average. So that was the 36 against Australia and 32 against India. I then think what I've got to look at is Warne's got a couple of stats that that really, really stand out for me. Number one is pre his shoulder operation. So 300 wickets prior to his shoulder operation. Prior to that, he really ripped his leg break. He used his wrong un a lot more, and he had that that flipper that was pretty famous throughout the course of his career. After the shoulder injury, he certainly lost a little bit of zip with that flipper. Couldn't really bowl the wrong one as much, and it hampered his leg break as well. He took 400 wickets essentially with a leg break and kidding you with one that went straight on that he called about 16 different things.
I've got 17 different names for the one that goes straight.
And then I think the other thing, and this is me, thinking a little bit as a keeper, and everyone talked about Gilchrist's impact on the game, and I'm not trying to diminish that. He was fantastic. For me, it was Warne almost who balanced that side, arguably more than Gilchrist did, because he was able to bowl 15 overs on the first day of a test match on a flat wicket and pick you up 2 or 3 wickets and only go for 2.5. He gave the ability for you guys, Australia, to play that attack with 3 real gun seamers and then pack your batting with 6 absolute legends, and Gilchrist coming in at 7. And then I think the final piece for me is, look, part of this is Ashes bias, the 40 wickets that he took in 2005, the ball of the century against Gatting in 93. He was about to retire and he went, well, I'm not going to retire having lost the Ashes to England. So 2006-07, gets carried off with his great mates at the end of the season, end of the series, having had a fantastic series 06-07 when we got our arses handed to us. So there's also a legacy of him winning the most important series in world cricket. I'm not even going to say for argument's sake, from 1993 through to 2007, with the exception of that one blip for him in 2005. So that's why I think you look at those stats and really interesting that you pull those wickets out and it's so close. And Warne also had a little bit of adversity as well. Most of it of his own making, but got himself into strife and had to come and front up a different kind of I guess worry and strife and stress and all that kind of stuff to what Murali was going through, but still had that paparazzi and cameras in his face all throughout the course of his career. He couldn't have a ham and cheese toast in a cigarette without someone running to Hello magazine, could he?
And yes, that's one way to put it, I guess. Going back to the on-field stuff, there's also the age-old question of if you have a great bowling attack around you, does that limit your wickets or increase your wickets that you can take? Because Murali probably, not even probably, I'll say he did not have as good a bowling attack around him.
Yeah, no disrespect to Jaminda Vas, but he's not
and he's really the only one.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at these two, stats aside, we know where they sort of sit. I looked at sort of key performances, and I keep coming back to Baller Century you're talking about, the 2005 Ashes. I don't know, maybe there's, because there is maybe a little bit of a negative narrative around Murali. We don't hear about those sort of spells that he bowled or key sort of innings where he turned series, turned games. I'm sure they're there, but we just haven't haven't revelled in them.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be hugely from where we're from, right? We see all of the Australian cricket. We don't see the big series that Sri Lanka wins. We don't necessarily even, now we probably have more access to
There
them.
also might not be. They're not big series because Sri Lanka.
Yeah, and there is definitely a part of that. I mean, I think, before we run out of time, I do think we should both talk in glowing terms, I think, about both of them and just how mesmerising it was to watch both of them. I mean, Murali, we had seen before the doosra and those kind of things. He wasn't the first to bring them in, but I think he was certainly the one who popularised them in terms of this is what everyone wants to be doing, and this is such a. I mean, yeah, you could say it was Sir Clay, someone like that beforehand, who I idolised when I was young, but. I mean, yeah, just some of the ways that Murali was able to spin the ball, that's what's so amazing.
The ability for him to get purchase on almost any surface, it was prodigious. Like, he turned the ball further than any finger spinner I've ever seen, and I think probably it would be fair to say he's probably got more revolutions on a cricket ball than just about any other finger spinner, just because of the physical uniqueness of the way his arm works and the way his wrist works and the way he managed to get all of that into the action that he has.
Well, I think you could argue he was a wrist spinner in the way that he bowled. Because of that uniqueness. Had the very short privilege of bowling with him in some international training nets at one point, and asked him, and wrist was the thing that he kept saying. Yeah, it's all about the wrist.
Did you ever try the action?
No, I couldn't do that, but I tried the carom ball.
Just picking up on that quickly, because inspiration is one thing that I was looking at in terms of who has had a greater impact on the history of cricket, and there's no doubt that Shane Warne did inspire for a short period of time a generation of young cricketers to want to bowl leg spin. He popularised leg spin bowling, I think, which was, at least in Australia, had been on the wane for some time. However, you have to say that the number of players you see in park cricket and in club cricket and in indoor cricket all around the world, but even here in New Zealand, there are a generation of people who all try and bowl like Murali. And even if I don't know about you, Adam, but whenever I sort of stand on the sideline before a social game of cricket or whatever, somebody at some point in almost every warm-up will try and bowl like Murali. There might be the odd sort of top order batter who might fancy themselves as a leg spinner in the nets at the end of the day when it's really dark and the ball's gone soft, but a lot of people try and bowl like Murali, and the impact that he's had on cricket is that he has really inspired a generation of players to think about bowling traditional finger spin in a different way.
What do you think that is, actually? Because I had that written down on my piece of paper as well. Who was the bigger game changer? And I think, like you say, there are more Murali type bowlers out there, and even international cricket and IPL. That mystery spinner has become a major thing, and we don't see the Warne. We don't see that many leg spinners around. I mean, we do see them, but we don't see Let me rephrase that. Yeah. We see a lot of leg spinners, but we don't see people like Warne.
And that's what separates him for me.
Yeah, is that like a big plus for him, that there have been many leg spinners, but no one can replicate the way that he's able to bowl. Whereas there have been, no one can really replicate Murali either, but a lot of people are able to, I think, get closer than they have been with Warne.
I think that's a question. We talked quite a lot about Murali's physical attributes. I think Warne is actually very similar to Murali in that sense. He had big hands, big stocky fingers, massive shoulders,
really strong forearms,
really strong forearms. Could have been a swimmer, well, probably couldn't because but ultimately he had physical attributes that made him completely unique in what he did, and that's that is probably a parallel that we don't often draw, but they're both mimicking, people are mimicking them, but can come nowhere close to doing it because they don't have the physical attributes in order to actually pull that off consistently.
Yeah, there really are a number of aspects that make them so unique and stand them out from pretty much everyone else who's ever played Test cricket up until this period. Not just their physical attributes that we've already spoken about, but their ability to work a batter out, their mental strategy and tactics that they employed I think, are far superior to any other spinner that I've seen in my lifetime, particularly Warne. Warne was 6, 7, 8, 10 moves ahead of the opposition batter, regardless of whether or not the conditions were working for him or they weren't. And they just had such, not just prodigious spin, but such control. I've never seen a leg spinner have the combination of control and prodigious turn that Warne had. He could land the ball exactly where he wanted it, every ball in the over, with exactly the amount of overspin and side spin that he wanted on the ball at that time. I can't tell you how hard it is as a leg spinner to produce that even once in an over, but for him to do it time after time after time, 60 to 120 times every day in Test cricket under the harshest of spotlights. And I think ultimately it's that level of control that separates him from everybody else, not just Murali, but everybody else. That combination of control and prodigious turn at the degree that he wanted to, that makes him, I think, the third best cricketer of all time.
I think the tactics and all that kind of stuff we might get to when we're kind of wrapping up the show and our arguments. But I did kind of want to ask you, who do you think has been the best facsimile, I guess, of Warne since then? Because we talked about the prodigious spin and all that kind of stuff. I have my own views on who that might be, but I'm fascinated to hear around the table because, like we said, I don't think there has been many that have been able to do what he could do with a cricket ball. And, I mean, that obviously speaks to his greatness.
I mean, many are called, but few have answered because I can't think of any. I mean, there are great leg spinners now, but none of them do or did what Shane Warne did. They all operate in very different kind of ways, and none of them really have that level of prodigious turn and control.
None of them spin it
as far. No, I would agree. I mean, Rashid Khan spins it a little bit. I mean, but
not his leg break.
Yeah,
but
it's all the wrong uns that spin.
Yes, exactly. A lot of players
Chahal
now
can
spin their wrong uns further than their leg breaks. Kumble did the same. Spun the wrong and further than his leg break. But yeah, I can't really think of anyone who's had a sustained international career that has done the same kind of things that Shane Warne has done since then.
The one that I think, in terms of actually just being able to spin the ball, and possibly one of the most unlucky cricketers of all time is Stuart MacGill. Like, he is the person that I look at and watch and go, like, Warne could have bowled that. Like, MacGill could have bowled some of those balls that Warne bowled. He didn't have the control. There was a lot of elements.
He was more side spin, wasn't he? He didn't really drift the ball.
No, a lot of elements.
Had a bigger spinning wrong and
he would have taken 500 wickets and playing for another country.
I think so.
Yeah.
He would have done. But yeah, to answer your question, there's no one like either of them, I don't think.
No.
And
one of ones.
Let's wrap this up, and I think just worth saying to listeners, if you do want to go back, obviously we're recording this well after probably nearly a year and a half after Shane Warne's untimely death. We did at the time record a tribute episode to Shane Warne where we talked a lot more about his impact on the game as well, which we've not sort of gone into a massive amount of detail on. So do dip back into the back catalogue to listen back to that. But I guess what I want to do is probably go from left to right as I'm looking at you, Lippy, and then Raj, and let Baldy have the final word because it's his labour of love, this Hall of Fame. But in less than sort of 2 or 3 sentences, who so you can put your notes away. Who shades it for you? Are you going to go with the stats, or do you think there's a compelling enough argument put forward for Warne as number 3 on this list?
I mean, look, it is impossible to split them in terms of as much as I was carrying on about Murali, it is impossible to split them when you and I actually do think that the way you broke down those stats, that appeased some of my concerns about those stats that I had, because it's very, very valid points that you made there. I'm still going to stay with Murali. I just think that he was such a special player, and I think you made another really valid point in that the adversity that he had to overcome is sort of sometimes undersold in his story. I think that there was so much, and I think there are probably still people out there, right, that say he chucked it or whatever, but I think that the public opinion turned on him very quickly in terms of, at the start, everyone kind of went, oh, he's a chucker. And then suddenly the public opinion turned on the umpires that went and did that and actually went, look, this guy is a special player, and, he's showed how his arm works. He's shown how all of this, he's jumped through all of these hoops. let this guy play and let him show how special he can be. And yeah, look, I think that we don't quite see his greatness here, and that in Sri Lanka and in the subcontinent that, you know, people look at Murali and just think, wow, you are, you know, godlike in that sense.
Yeah, I think, you know, a great way to judge great cricketers or great players in any sport is to do a sort of a silhouette test. You know, if you had a silhouette of Murali, a silhouette of Warney, you'd be able to tell straight away who they were. So they're definitely both greats of the game. Sure. Volume is important to me. You know, we've talked about the number of wickets, etc. But, you know, I'm going to say that volume stops mattering as much when you get to 707 wickets and you can start to look at other things. I am going to fall on the side of Shane Warne, purely for the fact that I think that he has transcended the game. He is a bit larger than the game. Personality goes with that legacy that he has created. The big, I think, you know, there's all those YouTubes going around. I think what's his name, Skull, said it the best, that, you know, the bigger the occasion, the bigger the performance for Shane Warne. So yeah, I pick him at number 3.
Lipper, you've put up a really compelling argument for Murali, and I think probably that the impact of that adversity wasn't something I'd massively thought about coming into the podcast. And I think, you know, I've said to Baldy privately, one of the things I used to do when you got Sky Plus when it first came out and you were watching an Ashes Test match, I used to fast forward the over of whoever bowled before Warne and to get to his over a little bit quicker when you were watching on catch up, and that to me is, you know, it says something that, you know, you would skip a passage of play just to watch a bloke bowl 6 balls. And I think, again, the volume of statistics really make you have to consider Murali's greatness, you know, 800 wickets versus 700. But for me, if I were only allowed one cricketing DVD, one bowler to watch for the rest of my life, it would be him. It would be Shane Warne. Every single day of the week, he was absolutely box office. And I think, you know, I didn't realise it probably until he died. It really did, you know, it hit me hard as a cricket fan. So, you know, I think that the impact that he's going to have on the game, in my view, is going to be greater than Murali's regardless of the stats. So for me, it's Shane Keith Warne.
You might have it, Baldy.
I don't think it's a matter of having it, because they are such wonderful cricketers, and they have stood out so far above everybody else really up until now. Jimmy Anderson's getting close in terms of edging his way towards 700 wickets, but if we think about, are we likely to see a replica or an equivalent of Warne or Murali in our lifetime? I think it's very, very unlikely that in our lifetime or our children's lifetime we'll see someone eclipse the level of Test cricketing greatness that we've achieved. And I think we, as cricket fans, perhaps took it a little bit for granted in the 90s and early 2000s when we were watching them, that we didn't really appreciate just how great they were. And in summing up this whole debate of Murali versus Warne, my wife asked me, look, if you could only watch one of them, you could watch their whole career, but you could only watch one or the other and never see the other one at all, which would you have rather have watched? And I think for me, it's very, very close, but I think I would rather have watched all of Shane Warne's career than watched all of Murali's career, despite the fact that he took almost another 100 more wickets and another 12 10-fers and another 35-fers. I would still have rather been witness to Shane Warne's career than Murali's, and that's why he edges them. Warne edges Murali for number 3 on the list of Test cricket Men's Hall of Fame.
Awesome. Well, listeners, we promised you 20 minutes. We've given you nearly 30, so you've got 33% extra free on the Top Order Podcast Hall of Fame this week. We will be back with the final episode of the Men's Cricketing Hall of Fame. We're going to talk about 2 batters. I'm sure you can guess who they are if you followed the list. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you soon on the next episode of the Top Order Podcast. Good night.